So why don't we go a couple slides forward, LT? So this is the question. The next slide is the question that we're asking. But what I really want to talk about is why we've brought back Convergence. So over the course of, Criterion will be 20 years old in January. And early on, I want to say 2004, we started bringing together our network as a way to have it be visible, right? You know, you have those conversations. Well, remember when we used to have conversations at coffee shops or on the road, but you have these conversations, you think, wouldn't it be amazing if you could talk to each other? Here are the people I can imagine talking to each other. So Jackie Vanderbrug and I, when we first cooked up Convergence, that was the idea of how can we take the amazing people that we know and bring them back together. And fast forward 16 Convergences later, over the next 10 or 12 years or something, we ended up stopping. We had done 5 Convergences that are quite well known. Suzanne's picked this up and now hosts the field of gender lens investing. But for the first 5 times we did that. And sort of brought people together to have conversations that was really important in building the field of gender lens investing. But over the last 6 years, we haven't hosted them. And the reason we're bringing it back is because of this urgency around gender-based violence. And as many of you know, for the last 2 years, we've been working on a campaign to prove that you can finance the reduction of gender-based violence, to globally bring people together to ignite a new set of possibilities. And it was actually at a board meeting sometime last year where, as we were talking about our strategy emerging, Michelle Kahane on our board said, you know what, you need to bring this ecosystem alive. You need to bring them together. And I said, remarkably, we have a way to do that. Let's bring back Convergence. And so that's what the next 3 weeks are. And there are parts of this that are alienating because we're online and that are going to make it harder. And I wish we could all be in a room and walking through hallways and having side conversations and chatting. Hopefully some of that can happen in workplace, which is where we'll keep driving you to talk to each other. And some of that sparked last night after we had our first kickoff for the other hemisphere. But part of it has really become a gift. The global nature of this conference, the inclusivity, the people who are able to participate who wouldn't have otherwise. We truly are spanning the globe and spanning time zones, as all of you are looking at your calendars and noticing the stretch that we're gonna do to some of your mornings and evenings. So this is a call to action. Maybe the next slide. So first of all, I also want to thank the people who have made this possible, which actually are you, by taking your amazing gift of time and your generosity in the registrations to be able to participate in this. And we have an amazing set of partners who have sponsored this conference in particular, and the combination of those two is really going to galvanize the effort overall, I believe. I think at some level, you're not just supporting a conference, you're not just participating in a conference. We see this as a broader call to action. LD, how about the next one? So why now? And this is the why now on gender-based violence. Many of you know this, but we're in a particular moment where I think we can galvanize attention on gender-based violence, and even beyond sort of Me Too and happening over the last couple of years, and then some of the pressure that's been building within investors who want to see more in their investments. They want to be able to accomplish more. Their government policies have become more important. Government policies who have a attention to gender and gender equality outcomes are also now saying we're not going to achieve gender equality if we don't tackle gender-based violence, which is absolutely true. So calling greater attention to this, and then the escalation in COVID has just taken this to a new level of both urgency and importance. The next slide then. We're gonna, because of that urgency and importance, we're gonna begin each conversation at Convergence, this session, and when we're in small groups and other places, with an acknowledgement. And so what I'm gonna ask you to do is lift your hands off the computer. No more, no keyboards, no clickers, right? Lift your hands off the computer, and I want you to hold your own hand, right? However you want to, but hold your own hand. We begin this session with an acknowledgement and a reminder. We are not alone. We have power in our hands, and this is not a light topic. And in this conversation, we will intellectualize and abstract a set of very real experiences. These discussions may trigger a wide range of emotions. In this room, statistically, there are many survivors of gender-based violence. And we all participate in the political, social, cultural, and economic systems that give permission for and facilitate violence. Globally, as many 200 million women have experienced, for example, female genital mutilation and cutting. 35% of women worldwide have experienced either physical or sexual intimate partner violence and non-partner sexual issues. Globally, 7% have been sexually assaulted by someone other than a partner. A moment of silence to acknowledge the violence happening in this precise moment to somewhere. Now, what I want you to do is reverse your hands. Notice the difference. We've come together to create new possibilities to address the epidemic of violence in our world, and connected in new ways, we can do even more. Let us. So as we go through the next couple weeks, we need to remember in each conversation as we're engaging to ground and reground in why we're here and what we're trying to address. Because a lot of our conversations are going to be pretty heady, right? We're working on the intersection of gender-based violence and finance, two massive systems that are both complex. What we're going to reflect on today as we go into small groups is thinking a little bit about expertise. As we read your bios, I fell in love with so many of you all over again as we imagined all of these conversations you could be having with one another and all that you bring to these conversations. And not just the expertise of what you have in the side channel, but just this amazing set of things. You come as experts. But as many as you know, I actually have my big qualification to be an expert in finance is that I have a PhD in 19th century American history, which allows me to tell you the date we made this shit up. That is basically what I'm qualified with. So I actually wrote my dissertation on the construction of expertise, about how it was in the 1830s, I was looking at prison reform, and the question was, who gets to say how prisons should be built? Longer story later if anybody wants to talk to me about that. But the core point was, how do we decide who's expert? Right? There's this process of construction of expertise that happens as people come together. We learn to perform our expertise in different ways, and expertise has a power. Next slide, LD. And part of that power is really about, I want to note that in the power, if you put the power of the expert of being a gender expert and the power of being a finance expert, the language and performance of finance is privileged. And so part of what I want us to be aware as we're in these conversations, that the key practice of convergence that is a grand experiment to see how well we can do online, is to be able to bridge very divergent expertise. And some of you already are translators, right? Devin, I think about you, or Suzanne, or Nina, or others who have been sort of bridging this for a long time. But as we think about bridging two expertise, I want us to be aware that in the big wide world, finance is usually privileged. And so my encouragement for those of you who are not used to being in finance conversations is to kind of just let it wash over you a little bit. Right? People are going to use acronyms that don't make sense. They're going to name things that don't understand. But part of the experiment here, the experience, is to be in those contexts, figure out how they're used and where can we connect. It also is to look up in Wikipedia or Investopedia what the heck they're talking about. I adore Investopedia. At any moment, you can look up and figure out what actually is supply finance compared to infrastructure finance, compared to derivatives. They have like pages that just define it. And for those of you who have our toolkits, many of you do, but we have this box of cards, so you can always bring that out as you go. And I will say, just a small promise, by Monday, right, Todd? This toolkit is going to be online, and so everybody will be able to access it. So this is part of what Convergence is creating in the world. And therefore, what everybody pledges within Toolkit, this is our training program as you go through it, is we don't expect you to become to name that you are a God's given expert on finance, but to not name anymore that you don't know it, right? That's sort of, so often in rooms, the first thing that a set of people who are often women do is say, I don't really know finance. Well, even in that moment, right, we're giving up the power to the people who do, to make sure that they know we don't. And so how do we balance that? And that's part of what we're going to be working on throughout all of this. So next slide then. So what we're going to do is we're going to break into a set of groups, and we are precisely on time. But we're going to break up into a set of groups and think about this question. When does people always have this Midwestern accent that I still can't get rid of. When does bridging expertise create new possibilities for change? So when does bridging expertise create new possibilities for change? So we're going to do a World Cafe. So these are a little bit hard to do online because a World Cafe often is that you come together in small groups and you discuss the question for a period of time, and then you move to a new group that has different people and you continue the discussion on the same question with a new group. And Juanita Brown, who developed World Cafe, did this as a way both to have ideas travel, but also to encounter all of the different ways that people think. If you talk to one group of people about this question and then you talk to another, how different that can be. So we're going to do this twice. We're going to send you out to breakout groups, hopefully about 4 people each. You will talk for 7 minutes, and then we'll bring you back together and then send you back out again. So you're going to be pulled back in and then sent back out again. And then pulled back in. It's a little violent, but it'll be okay. And so within that, one request. Um, I invite you to just jump into the conversation. Our instinct often in these conversations is to start with everybody taking time to introduce themselves and placing themselves. And sometimes that is also, sometimes that's about building trust. Sometimes that's about naming who I am and positioning my expertise. So I'm going to ask you to enter into this conversation and dive in. Partly because we're going to be working on lots of other ways within Convergence for you to be getting to know each other and seeing all of the different ways that people land. But for this one, try to just jump in and start the conversation. So Todd, are we ready to go?
We are. And just as Joy was kind of saying, once I press this little button here, it's going to look like you're going to be like exiting Zoom because it's going to like essentially leave this main room and then you will automatically join this group of 4. So just be prepared for that. There's nothing you did wrong on that. But yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and press the button and you should be in your group within a few seconds.
He's coming back.
That was not 7 minutes.
That was not 7. Well, literally, it was on a timer. Unfair. But what came out of it? I couldn't actually see who said that, but now you came off mute. What happened in your group that you wanted to stay in there? Oh, hi, Tim.
Hi, it was Tim Coffin speaking.
Hi.
Well, part of the problem was we actually had a little bit of unmute and mute problems. So we spent a little bit of time kind of getting over the Zoom hurdles that we're all used to at this point. And what came we couldn't come up with, there was no, nobody could come up with a scenario where bridging expertise would actually be a negative, right? Like there was no discussion of that actually creating any kind of problems. And in fact, I think what we arrived at is that all it really does is allow you to take a more holistic approach to finding solutions and obviously brings innovation, brings about the approach of innovation. And it was just getting going, and then all of a sudden it said you have 6 seconds.
All right. Well, you're going to have another 7 minutes and 1 second to get going. Any other comments that folks want to call out of what happened in your groups?
In our group, we talked about that to some degree, but at the very end, we started talking about how white supremacy culture actually is woven into this conversation deeply, and how critical it is actually for those of us who are trying to advance structural change, call that out. That the system has been built on a set of assumptions that reinforce white supremacy. And that as we try and dismantle the patriarchal and misogynist structures that make investing in a way that ends gender-based violence, we also need to call out white supremacist culture because it's kind of invisible to us. And yet I believe the finance industry in particular has that as a core part of how it's structured. And so that was some of where we were heading in our discussion that feels very, very important to call out specifically.
Absolutely. And we will continue to find ways to highlight that throughout this in terms of all different types of intersectionality. It sort of who's partly it's what knowledge is seen as expert and who is allowed to claim the title. There's just so much baked into that from many, 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 many angles. One more comment before Todd sends us back out again. Thank you for that.
In our group, we acknowledged the language that makes things very opaque. Mm-hmm. So the people who know get to keep knowing, and the people who don't know get to feel stupid. And I made a reference when I was in a meeting once. They were talking about investing $1.25, and I said out loud, "Who the hell wants to invest $1.25?" And was told, "Well, that is clearly like," and I felt like an idiot, but
right.
If I hadn't asked, I would have gone away thinking that was $1.25.
I will never forget the first moment that somebody asked me if I wanted points in a deal, and it was like a college buddy. And I was so proud that I knew what they meant, but that sort of the ability to go past, right? It was like I had literally looked it up earlier that day, right? That sort of how do you get past these things that are, I think, while it is not personal, it is intentional that it stays opaque. I don't think individuals are not trying to be opaque. Sometimes they are, obviously, but the system seeks to keep it opaque. Really good points. Are we ready to go out, Todd?
We are. We are.
All right.
All right.
Go back and forth again. I love how you can tell that everybody stayed in their small groups till the last possible moment, as opposed to the invitation to come back early. So any comments coming out of that last bit? Wow, it's amazing to see so many friends and faces on this. Any other quick call-outs? Otherwise, we'll carry on. Well, hopefully you can take those conversations continuing in to the discussions over the next couple weeks. It's amazing to have a conference over a couple of weeks, but it'll be curious to see what emerges from that. So I want to step back a little bit to some more questions, and I'm going to spend the rest of the time really talking about how to participate in Convergence and a little bit of guidance around that. So the first piece is to say the practices of Convergence are grounded, the design of Convergence, how we think about this is grounded in Criterion's 3 values. That is actually one of the most constant things in the last 20 years. And the first is to think about grace, which for us means trusting the world to surprise you, rather than seeking to control it. So rather than saying, here's what I need out of this conversation, what can be created from that conversation, what surprises you? But as you walk into that, it's also about this question of hospitality, of welcoming the stranger, knowing that the stranger will change you. It's an ancient definition of hospitality. And I think the first part of our understanding of hospitality is we work on financing the reduction of gender-based violence. I don't know, Tia, sometimes, right? It feels like all day, every day, or you probably do all day, every day, think about this, right? But we were changed by you showing up, right? So how we're hosting you is to not just say, here are the things that we think should be talked about, but this is what you said should be talked about. And so that's sort of seeking to be changed by the stranger, not just to change them. And then the last piece is really around the power of invitation. And so often what we think about with invitation is how we're invited. And that really does matter, right? How people are invited, what that experience is, do they feel welcomed? And we were just talking yesterday about all these microaggressions that can slip into whether or not somebody feels welcomed, whether that's how you say their name or what comes up early, all of those kind of moments. But part of the power of invitation is also that we all have the power to invite. And so we need to not wait to be invited. And as many of you know who founded your own organizations, and when the table wasn't set, you just created a new table. And so we'll really invite you to do that within Convergence. If the conversation that you want to have happening isn't happening yet, we have ways that we can support you to create a circle and start new conversations to invite people into different ways of being. So that's going to follow across there are 3 pillars of Convergence. The first is context. And over the next couple, I keep thinking over the next couple of weeks, it's hard to say that, so imagine a conference for weeks. But over the next couple of weeks, there'll be context sessions that will be scheduled that you can participate, but there'll also be asynchronous I'm creating a whole bunch of videos just to explain things that, I don't know, seem to come up as people are asking questions. You can post things on Workplace to say, here's a really important paper that I think everybody should see. Here's a, you know, the sharing the context, and so that we can come together. And then the second piece is connections, how we have these regional connection sessions that will happen twice over this time. We have a whole list of, Carolyn on this has just been a fiend at looking through all of your bios and saying, I can imagine these people connecting. And Shadrach, a friend of ours from Kenya who's joined us, had a sort of came out of last night's conversation like, oh my goodness, so many people, can you help me really figure out how to connect with them? So we're here to support that networking. And also the third piece then is the conversations. And there are 30 conversations. There were 20, and then a lot more people registered. So we went up to 30. And we've designed each of these conversations and placed you in them. And so what's important about that, and those of you who have been to Convergence before, there's a couple things we look for. One is, which conversation do you want to be in, or how this matches? What expertise is needed? Do we have too many gender people and not enough finance people? We pay attention to tracks. And please call this out if it becomes a problem for you, but you know, you might just end up in lots of conversations with the same person. And so we're trying to mix it up to have you connect with lots of different people, as opposed to have the same group in a track on the same set of things. And then we've really been trying to keep the size small. And so most of the conversations, well, we'll see what happens with attrition. Right now, they're designed to be about 14 people. So we expect to have, you know, 9 or 10 on each conversation, but that's the size we want it to be. We actually want people to be able to engage and be in a conversation. So if you ask for changes or you want to join more conversations, go ahead and ask your relationship manager, and we'll see what we can do. No harm in asking, and would love to know, and we're getting a flurry of these requests. We love to know, and we love the passion, and we can't promise anything. But each of the conversations, all the content in the conversations and the questions will be made public as soon as it happens. And for many conversations, we'll be recording them. Our rule of thumb is going to be, well, I don't know if it's a rule of thumb. One is, did something get shared? Did it end up in a place where sharing it publicly, if you weren't in that conversation, it's just not appropriate, and then we'll just not share them. And the second piece is, it might just, you know, so we'll sort of determine whether or not they should be shared, and we'll have a conversation about that in each conversation. But our intent is to try to get as many recorded conversations out as possible. We'll see how that goes. So next slide then. The arc of conversations, these 30 conversations, they start at framing. And so all the conversations this week are not yet moving to action. So if people are having high level conversations and you're like, come on, let's get to action, this is the wrestle with ideas set. So what does it mean to talk about the connection between gender-based violence and women's economic empowerment? How does that work together? What is a survivor lens? What are we talking about when we say that? The next week, the next set of conversations that you should be in, about 1 conversation, some of you are in 2, are strategy conversations that are, how do we approach this? Like, how does it even work to use finance to address gender-based violence? What are the broader strategy questions? And then there are 10 conversations on design, and that's when we dive way down into the details that say, how do we create this thing? How do we design this thing? What will work? And then the last set is moving back out to implementation. And these are some of my favorite conversations, because so many of the questions that you all are bringing really revolve around the question that we talked about today, which is how do we bridge, right? And so we have a set of conversations about developing translators, and how do we enable civil society organizations to have a greater relevance in systems of innovative finance. And so that's the kind of, once we've designed these ideas, we have about 10 conversations about the how of implementing and how we move them forward. So moving on to the next one then. So we're going to continue to suggest that you get to know each other on Workplace. We're creating these things we're calling circles, and so those will be created over time. And some are out now, more will be out by Monday, but you can also request those. We'll be talking about, sort of talking to you about one-on-ones we might suggest. And we also suggest that if you want to post anything that your organization is working on, just get it up in Workplace. Those are your profiles to cover whatever you want. And so imagine Workplace as the door to the conference, right? So if you were going to a venue and you were going to walk in the venue and encounter people, have that as the image of Workplace. This is how you, this is where we're connecting. This is where we're sharing the knowledge and continuing to move things forward. And that will be facilitated by, on the next slide, these amazing relationship managers. So these are the 5 folks at Criterion. So Christina's on this call if you want to wave. Many of you know Christina. And Tia. I love how everybody's waving back. So Tia, are you on the call someplace? I'm sorry, I might be not be on my screen.
Yes, and I'm waving.
You're waving, I just had to scroll down. There's so many people. Carolyn Burns, right next to Tia, or at least for me. Laura Harris and Felicity are in Australia, and so they're not on this call. But those will be the folks that all of you have been assigned to, just to humanize them a little bit. The other person on the call today from Criterion, just to call him out because he's an amazing resource and will be leading a couple conversations, is Pranay. So you can wave and say hi, the amazing guy working on our team. So the next slide then. As we go through this, the question of how do we take this time to move towards action? And one of the things that came up last night is, remarkably, sort of delightfully, as we go through these 17 days, there's then 16 days of action on gender-based violence coming up in November. So how do we connect this work to the broader set of work that's going on that so many of you are part of in the broader piece? LD, maybe if we stop sharing the screen, we've got about 7 minutes. I've seen one question come up in the chat here, Andrew. If you've got particular questions that you want me to answer, feel free to drop them into the chat. But also, I want to hear a little bit what your hopes are. So we have about 7 minutes to share some of that. But before we do, Andrew, I'll come back to your question, which was one more time about the, are we recording conversations and making them public? I think we need to get I think every time I've said this, I've said it more confusingly. My apologies. So all of the context sessions will be recorded and distributed. So this will be recorded and posted. The sessions on Monday, what are they called, LD? What are those? Roundups.
So we will be providing recordings of the weekly roundups, where Joy will be recapping insights, findings, emergent topics, and ideas from all of the conversations in a session that occurs 3 times on a Monday called the weekly roundup. We'll make sure to record that and post the recordings in the knowledge library on Workplace. We'll also be recording all of the context sessions and also posting them via the knowledge library on Workplace. Resources and reading materials associated with those sessions located on the knowledge library. You can find this by going to the left-hand side of your screen when you log in, click See More and click Knowledge Library. And we have a bunch of different organized categories of helpful information, from logistical information like your guest guide to it gives you tips and tricks on how to set up your home space and ground your space so you can fully engage in the conference, all the way to research papers, portfolio pieces done by Criterion over the many years. So we have a myriad of resources available. If you have any questions, of course, your relationship managers are here to help. So is Joy, so is myself. We want to try and make sure that Workplace as a digital venue is a place where you can, you know, explore, peruse, read, connect with each other, chat. The benefit of having a global audience is someone's always up. So if you want to jam on something related to Convergence, head over to Workplace, start posting, share on your own profile, and we hope you enjoy all of the content we're putting together.
And the individual conversations, LD, you're amazing. So this is our amazing event producer who some of you might have remembered. She produced the CEO Global Summit. And so this has just been amazing to work with her. On the conversations, we will record all of them. We will determine at the end of the conversation with the group whether or not it should be posted. We expect to post most of them, but we'll see how that goes. So no guarantees on that.
And on that note, Joy, as well, we are planning on making the groups for those conversations public, so you can at least see the chat that's been contributing to the event that occurred. So yeah, more to come.
More to come. Hopes from Convergence. Any thoughts? Looking at your smile, Suzanne, I'm wondering what your hope is. Can I call you out?
Yes. My hope is to learn so much more from all of you about what you're doing, what your barriers are, what's working, what we need to do to collaborate better to move this work ahead, so that I can be a better advocate and spokesperson and connector back in the Gender Smart community and with my platform of my speaking and my writing. And I'm just so excited about learning from all of you.
And you've been I think you came to all 5 of the convergences on gender, right? It's amazing to, thank you for all your partnership. Anybody else want to share hopes? Nina, I see you leaning in. No. Who else wants to share?
Always to learn. I mean, just even the breakout sessions this morning gave me an immense new understanding of expert in framing.
Wonderful. One other person?
My hope is to connect with new friends, get more ideas, because I work with men and boys to promote gender equality. I would like to learn from participants how they work with men and boys in their areas, so that I can do the same here in Kenya. So those are my hopes. I'm making new friends, connecting with people who use finance to end gender-based violence.
Yeah,
I'll be so happy to get such kind of information.
Right. Thanks, Elias. And I think just one of the pieces that I'm excited to learn from, and we've been in a learning journey with Rosalind and Elias and a few other amazing colleagues from Kenya for a while now, about how to really build translators who can connect gender and finance in grassroots organizations. And I think that's also one of the key questions to keep asking, right? How do we and how do we make those connections into the sort of the depth of the work, Elias, that you do in the world, which is unbelievable. One more hope, and then we'll call it a day. Learn and share. Oh, Rosalind, you're also in another one of our amazing folks. So final, I'll just say it, I am thrilled to have you all here. I can't believe this is happening. Talk to us, ask us questions if you have challenges. Your relationship managers are here to help, and welcome to Convergence.
Let's take a photo.
Yeah. You got to get both screens though, LG. So everybody's
I know.
Oh, you know everything. You're the smart one.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.
All right. Be well.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
See you in conversations.
Thank you so much.